Hi, Suchadatta here, teaching you SST and picking up the chapter of history, Nationalism in India. In the first unit of class 10, we've been talking about nationalism in various parts of the world. In the first chapter, we saw nationalism in Europe. Second chapter, we dealt with nationalism in Indochina, and here we talk about nationalism in India. This chapter is very interesting and also very easy since it deals with Indian history. You see children, when Britishers came to India, the first major victory that they had was the Battle of Plassey, after which they became the masters of Bengal, followed by the Battle of Buxar, which made them the masters of India. After which they started the policy of having strong hold over the Indian soil, not only politically but also economically. The new land revenue systems were given to the people of India because they felt that if the money flowed was actually coming in their hands, they would be able to have better control over the Indian soil. Starting from the permanent settlement of Bengal and coming down to the Rayatwari system, there was a long process to go. But in all this context, something which they did not realize, or even if they realized, they did not bother, was they were exploiting the Indian masses and taking them to that situation when they would have definitely revolted against the foreign regime. So, this is the history of the colonial rule in India, wherein they tried to actually suppress, oppress and exploit the Indians, and they were not given the basic rights. Now, before I start with the chapter, I will tell you the meaning of the new terms of the chapter. The first term is nationalism. The word nationalism has been occurring in the first two chapters also, because we've been talking about nationalism in both the countries. So, nationalism is a simple term which means love for one's own country. Now, love for one's own country arises at different levels due to different situations. And here, nationalism that we shall be dealing with is actually to do with the colonial rule, the British rule in India. Second is influenza epidemic. Influenza epidemic is actually a very bad disease by which thousands of people are killed, and this takes away not only the lives of the people but also gives them a lot of suffering. That's influenza epidemic. This happened during the colonial rule in India. That means this again becomes a feature for nationalism. Next is forced recruitment. Forced recruitment. Recruitment actually is a word related to forces, that is the army, navy or the air force, and forced recruitment is a word which means when people are forced to join the armed forces. During the British Raj, the villagers, especially the young ones, were told to join the Indian army because the Britishers wanted the Indians to go and fight in the overseas. During the world wars, there was lot of requirement of manpower. That is why there was forced recruitment. That is, when the young people are forced, that is, they are not willing, but they are forced to join the armed forces, that's called the forced recruitment. Next is satyagraha. I have been talking about this word in the previous chapter in Indochina whenever I made a comparison with the Indian nationalism. Satyagraha was a novel method started by Gandhiji, wherein he said truth and non-violence actually can play a big role in ousting out a major enemy. So, Satyagraha is a weapon by which Gandhi tried to give a blow to the mighty British Empire. Next is Rowlatt Act. This Rowlatt Act was passed in the year 1919, by which the British government got unlimited power to actually imprison anybody for any number of years without telling him the reason of his imprisonment. That is, where would they apply such a thing? It would be whenever they found a nationalist, a patriot, somebody who was opposing their Raj. That is the time they used this Rowlatt Act, by which they actually put a person in the prison behind bars without telling him why he has been put behind the bars. Next is civil disobedience. Civil disobedience was the second mass movement of Gandhi. First was non-cooperation and the third was quit India. Civil disobedience movement meant when he urged the Indian people, when he asked the Indian people to disobey the British Raj in a very, very peaceful manner. That is, disobey them but do not become violent. That's civil disobedience movement. Do not pay the taxes. Do not go to the schools and colleges run by the Britishers, and also to discard all that was British made, but in a peaceful manner. Next is Hartal. Hartal is a Hindi word which means a strike. Strike whenever you want to demonstrate, whenever you want to protest against any injustice that is done by the government or an organization, and people come in masses and sit down, that's called as Hartal. That is when they stop working. Next is martial law. Martial law, the word martial means military. Martial law is a military rule wherein all the basic rights of the people are suspended and new laws are imposed on the people which are very difficult. So, martial law in fact means taking away all the basic rights of the human beings. It's almost like a dictatorial rule. Now, I continue with the next terms in the next clipping. साबरमती के लाल तूने कर दिया कमाल, दिला दी हमें आज़ादी बिना खड़ग बिना ढाल. That's what we talk about Gandhi, and this particular chapter actually deals with Gandhian era, because in this age, starting from 1919 to 1947, in the Indian history has been termed as the Gandhian era, because he started with three big mass movements and he was the central figure of all the nationalism that was going on in India. The strategies, the policies, the leader was just one, and that was Gandhi and Gandhi alone. Now, the next term, or the next actually the place which you must know, is the Jallianwala Bagh. Jallianwala Bagh is in Amritsar, and this place is important in the Indian history because the people had gathered, the people of Punjab, to celebrate their festival Baisakhi on 13th April 1919, when General Dyer entered and started fire. Next is Khalifa. Khalifa or the Caliph is the religious head of all the Muslims and who resided in Turkey. People all over the world, or rather the Muslims all over the world, felt that if anything was wrong, anything was done wrong to the Caliph, it was almost like disturbing the Muslim religion. So, the people when protested in India against the wrongs which had been done to the Caliph is called as the Khilafat movement, started by Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali. Next is boycott. Boycott is when people refuse cooperation with the government, that is boycott. That is the time when we do not want to do anything that the government wants us to do. Going against the wishes of the government is actually boycott. Next is a picket. Picket is when people block the entrance of a shop or an office or a workshop or a factory, that is they stand outside, 3-4 of them, and do not allow anybody to come inside, is actually a picket. Next is khadi. Khadi is a hand spun handloom cloth, and khadi is almost like when we talk of Gandhi, khadi comes to our mind. He was the one who made charkha and khadi as a symbol of Indian nationalism. Begar. Begar is when the people are forced to work either in plantations or at other places without paying anything to them, is begar. Next is Gudem rebellion. Gudem rebellion actually is a rebellion which broke out in the Gudem hills of Andhra Pradesh, and it was a militant rebellion, and the people fought there in the guerrilla warfare. What is guerrilla warfare? It's like they hide in the hills, and when suddenly the enemy comes to the forefront, they come out of the hiding place and they start fighting and suddenly disappear and hide themselves in the hills, and the enemy does not come to know about it. This practice was also started or was also done by Shivaji the Great. Next is dominion status. Dominion status is a status which is enjoyed by other dominions of British Commonwealth such as Australia and Canada. Commonwealth games, have you all heard of? What is Commonwealth? At that time, since the Britishers thought themselves to be mighty supreme, and it was said that the sun never rises in Britain. So, Britain, along with all the colonies that it had in the world, was termed as Commonwealth. That is, everybody's wealth was actually one, the wealth of Britain.